This is Cabin Mountain, in the townland of Lislasley. Beneath this tranquil setting, nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Spurns, lies a deep and painful past and a long legacy of resistance to British rule in Ireland. This is a hard country, which still bears the scars of famine and decades of mass emigration. Generations of young men growing up in these mountains understood fully the effects of British involvement in Ireland. Going back to the plantations of the 16th century and through the dark days of hunger, up to the formation of the Irish Volunteers in Kepa in 1913, and the raids on neighbouring Altmoran and Gannon at the height of the War of Independence. Different generations from these hills carried the torch of rebellion and brought the fight to the British. Volunteer Martin McCaughey was a young man who refused to lie down. He was to pay the ultimate price for his dedication. Martin joined the IRA when only a teenager, but soon he established himself as a competent and fearless freedom fighter and a natural leader. Martin, alongside his comrade Dessie Grew, were murdered by an undercover British Army unit outside Loughgall, County Armagh in 1990. Dessie grew up in County Armagh, an historic county where the great battles of the last of the Gaelic chiefs took place on the banks of the River Blackwater, an area that has since been marked by the trappings of British occupation. During the War of Independence, in the town of Charlemont, not far from Desie's home place in the Grange, the IRA destroyed a British outpost that dated back to 1602. In the 1970s and 80s, the Catholic population were terrorised in that area, which became known as the Murder Triangle, with the Grew family home having been blown up in a sectarian attack in 1972. Desmond Grew was a dedicated volunteer and a progressive thinker. His socialist analysis made him see the importance of attacking British imperialism anywhere that it appeared. So, like Tone and Emmett before him, he made for the continent to further the struggle against British rule. Desi and Martin were two men who did not sit in silence. They decided to take the fight to the British, a fight broad in its scope and lethal in its execution. This film pays tribute to both volunteers and tells their story in their quest for Irish freedom.
Oh, storm a cree when you're far away from the home that you'll soon be leaving. It's many a time by night and by day that your heart will be sorely grieving. For the stranger's land may be bright and fair and rich in its treasures golden. You'll pine, I know, for the long ago and the love that is never olden.
Desmond Grew and Martin McCaughey were shot dead at farm buildings in a remote area not far from Loughgall. Local people say that after several bursts of gunfire, orange flares were fired and a helicopter was quickly on the scene, pointing to an army undercover operation. Martin McCaughey was a former Sinn Féin councillor. He was linked to a shooting incident in County Tyrone earlier this year. Some security sources suggest he may have been wounded, and he was eventually disqualified from Dungannon Council for not attending meetings. The RUC said Desmond Grew had been a terrorist since the early 1970s. They say he'd been involved.
What happened to our family come about because of the sheer injustice that an oppression of Catholics in that era, where my brothers saw injustice and they stood up to be counted and said it was wrong, and therefore it ended up that we were involved in the political struggle, not through any influence from outside but just by the political situation of the day. Hello, my name is Patricia O'Neill. I'm Desmond Grew's sister and Seamus Grew's sister. I was born and raised in County Armagh, a place called The Grange. We later moved to Charlemont. My first memories of Desmond was in The Grange, country children living in a rural and idyllic environment. He believed in equality for everyone. He was a very smart, funny, bright, intelligent man. He was calm, thoughtful. He was second eldest in a family of 11 and therefore guided and influenced us all. He loved politics, he loved his Irish culture, he loved music, he loved flacheos, he loved everything that there was about his country. We spent a few years in Armagh and my parents bought a house in Charlemont and we moved to Charlemont, which was a predominantly Protestant village close to the Moy, where we moved in and we lived there for 18 months. My parents went to a dinner dance for the local football club along with my elder siblings, and on the way, in the middle of the night, the window smashed and a bomb was thrown in through the window and our house was blown up with us inside the house, children and all. The same night there was 2 other bars blown up. At that stage it was considered that we were living within the so-called murder triangle. No one was ever got, to my knowledge, for bombing us. But again, we survived another traumatic experience. We came out of the rubble to find that our sister had been arrested by the police. Our parents were nowhere to be seen. We were taken by ambulance to Dungannon Hospital, where luckily enough we escaped no physical injuries but a lot of mental injuries. At one stage they tried to say that we blew ourselves up as children, that we'd been making bombs, which was found not to be true. But our experience ever since that was visiting jails, hitching to Belfast on a Saturday morning with a parcel, hitching to Portlaoise with a parcel, being harassed on the street, being shunned by our neighbours for being Republicans, and just fighting the fight against injustice. With the madness of it all and the trauma that we suffered and the constant harassment and the constant difficulties within family life trying to be normal, the family became fragmented. There was brothers in jails, relationships under pressure, and it was a difficult time. And although it was difficult, we become stronger and we stood together and we did what we had to do to survive.
The unmarked police car overtook the yellow Allegro and its unsuspecting passengers at the edge of Mullaghcreevy estate. Having forced them to stop, Robinson and another constable jumped out. Carol in the passenger seat was shot dead instantly. Meanwhile, the other constable was pumping rifle fire into the far side of the Allegro. Then, reloading, Robinson came round to the passenger side door. Grew got out, and Robinson shot him through the back at a range of 2 foot 6 inches to 3 feet. An extra piece of drama was added by the evidence of Constable John Robinson, accused of murder in the Armagh shooting. He revealed that a special RUC unit had trailed Grew and Carroll across the border into the Irish Republic on the night they were shot. Another bombshell. All the RUC men charged with murder were acquitted. The trials left a bad taste in many mouths.
It's a show! They love it! Give them another gun and they come out at the end and shoot on right him! Shoot on right him!
But there isn't justice. No, that's all. I give everybody justice, but I'm very sad that there isn't justice.
On the 12th of December 1982, the worst trauma happened in our family to date. Seamus was shot dead in Mullacreevy Hill, and never having experienced death in the family before, it was indescribable, the grief and the effect that that death had on us. We were in the area, we were young teenagers, and we couldn't believe what had happened. And then to follow on after that death, to lose Desmond on the 9th of October 1990 in similar circumstances. It's hard to say how we felt, but yet again traumatised. Unbelievable, both to be shot at the hands of British forces. It confirmed what we'd always believed, that we were under siege and victims of the British.
Some poets sing of a noble king, or of a sweetheart fair. Some tell a tale of ships that sail with treasures rich and rare. But my humble pen still drifts again to scenes of long ago, across the sea.
Desi then finished off the Greens primary school. He passed his 11 plus and went to the Christian Brothers, where he was educated by the Christian Brothers. He left there with, I think it was 5 O levels and 2 A levels. Right. He then went to live. The Troubles were starting up at that stage, and he got involved with the People's Democracy, which was a leftist group at the time based in Queen's University, students type of thing, and who were a part of the civil rights movement at that stage. A man called John Gallagher, who was the first man shot in the Troubles, who was a friend of my brother Seamus's, who worked along with Seamus in the local factory. Right? He was shot dead by the B-men, who came in and opened up on one of the protests in Armagh City. So that would have had a big influence on the path that we would have taken at that stage. Easy going person, a good communicator with people. You know, he spoke a number of languages. Visitors would be in at the protest. He was able to translate for people or whatever, you know. So he joined the IRA. That had been about 72, and became extremely active in the campaign at that time. At a young age, he was probably a year later, he became OC of Armagh. There was a number of very successful operations in that period of time. He would have been a speaker at H-block meetings, local H-block meetings. He would have chaired or spoke or whatever, you know. That would have been another role he would have been playing for by, you know. So he was caught in County Louth and finished in Portlaoise along with me. He got 10 years in jail. His fingerprint, one fingerprint, was caught on a number plate of a car. Non-jury court gave him 10 years. The car had been used in an operation, and that was it. Like, there was, at the time the operation was taking place, my brother was on television outside the Cardinal's house in Armagh at a His Block rally, so he had a 100% alibi for not being there, but it was true out in court. It was on camera, like, you know. So on the night my brother was killed, we had heard there was a shooting, and in Armagh, but there was no further details. So we went to bed and got up the next morning and turned on the radio, and then that's how we found our brother was killed. We applied for a compassionate parole to attend the funeral, you know. Desi had probably about 5 years left to do. I had 1 year left to do, and we were refused parole. So we couldn't attend the funeral. So we were the first 2 Republican prisoners ever to be refused parole for a family funeral. Desi went on hunger strike immediately, and it was too late. But authorities in the Free Staters in the south gave an assurance that it would never happen again. But I think at that stage that would have left a further dent in our commitment to face these people down, in terms of it would have had a big effect that we couldn't have buried our own brother.
I understand that you met Seamus Grew some time ago.
Well, I believe that it's the same person. I was on an official visit to the Maze prison, and we visited the various compounds at that time, and I remember speaking to a Mr. Grew, who was the leader of the INLA compound at that time, and I think his parting comment to me was, when we take control, there won't be enough trees in Armagh to hang you and the likes of you on. I knew he was at that time serving a fairly long sentence, but of course I failed to take account of the fact that with 50% remission he might be looking for trees a lot earlier than I thought.
Here's our home place here. This is the home of Seamus and Desi. You know, the Grew family go back here 11 generations. As the home place. The home place was burnt out in 1970, I think. You know, it was a very sectarian part of the country. Basically, this is the home place. These are the fields that we would have been born around and played football for the local club here, the Greens Club. That's the school. We used to go to the school there, and every morning we'd have to go across the fields, cut across the fields into the school, rather than walk around the roads, because the roads was maybe 3 miles, the fields was 1 mile.
My early memories were of visiting in Loughgall prison. We would have caught minibus from Armagh to Loughgall on a Wednesday and Saturday. So I would have been released from school and did the usual. It became a frequent jaunt. Very early on, memories of Loughgall was visiting the Quakers Centre. Quakers volunteer centre down there, and they were very good to prisoners' children. It was a very cold place. You would have visited where you went in and you had the watchtowers. You had revolving gates that had an awful clang. To this day I can still remember the clang as you're stepping through them, and it was always very hurried. The hour was never enough, and as a child, yes, I sat on my father's knee, and but you always had the prison warden standing over you, so probably the intimacy wasn't there that you'd want. At 6, 7 I was beginning to realise that It was a very abnormal situation, and you really at that age begin to feel that it was wrong that he was there. It was wrong that your life was so different from your friends. There's to me trying to educate me about country ways of life, trying to educate me as to why he was in prison, and again in later years I felt that a lot of the content of those letters was kind of laying down a history for me, because there was an inevitability about the eventual outcome. Well, I got released in April 1982, and the raids became very frequently, and to the point that numerous complaints had been made to the local clergy, and it was a case of very real threats issued to my father in person, and in one instance himself, probably about 2 months prior to when he was actually killed, during another house raid, one of the policemen told me that I wouldn't be having my father around for too long. At that stage I was only 8. I did not spend one Christmas with him. He was killed in December 1982, so we didn't even get to spend that Christmas together. That was his 1 year out of prison. So Mum was bathing me on that Sunday evening in preparation for school Monday morning, and Father MacDonald, local administrator in Armagh, called to the house shortly after 9, and he broke the news that my dad had been killed probably a quarter of a mile from where we lived. At that stage I can recall taking myself off to a quiet cubby hole and crying at the thought of losing my father.
This is the same one you see that Fitzgerald now hands Republicans across the border when refusing to allow Shimy's brother Desi compassionate parole at the same time. But these same one you see men know and fear the determination of the nationalist people in their struggle. Even as Shimmy and Roddy lie here before us, they will live in our memories as the unquenchable spirits of resistance, which has opposed everything this rotten state has stood for since its creation. Therefore, for us today, the task is clear. We must not lose time in weeping or mourning our dead, for they provide the inspiration for the struggle ahead. I would like to conclude this oration with a quotation from Robert Emmet. Having known both our fallen comrades well, I feel this would be very appropriate. The quote from Emmet follows: "Not until my country takes its place among the nations of the world, then and only then that our epitaph be written." Thank you.
Get out in the late 80s. Immediately returned to active service. For a short period, he would have operated in a local capacity of East Tyrone. He then moved to mainland Europe. He would have operated in Germany and Holland. Then was extended to there, so he would have been pretty active on the continent, and he would come home from time to time and slot in local to the local effort, where he finished getting killed along with Martin McCaughey.
My name's Shane McCann from Monaghan. Come from a Republican background myself. I worked in a bar. It was the Oriole Hotel. There was a bar in the Oriole Hotel in Monaghan. Got a job there when I was 16. And I knew people coming in and out that were associated with active republicanism. And it was through a guy who grew up beside me, who had been in prison. He used to come in with Dessie Grew, and that was my first encounter. That was my first conversations with Desi, and those kind of conversations led through the nights, through talking about the problem in the north and about Desi's involvement in the problem in the north. And what impressed me about Desi was that first of all, he was a very, very, very intelligent person. He came across in a very kind of thoughtful way. He came across in a way that, he never looked down on you, he never looked any other way. He was actually interested in talking to you and explaining where the problem was, what his kind of view on the problem was, what his kind of ideas of finding a way through that problem was. And I suppose I felt the same way. I found myself identifying with Desi's kind of ideas and what he was thinking. And at the same time, Desi was a very jovial man. There was a lot of crack going on at the same time, but he also, impressed upon you the kind of sense that there was a possibility to kind of fight against the British or what was happening in the north at the time. I mean, I remember particularly internment in 71 and Bloody Sunday in 72, that the whole kind of thing changed. There was a resentment towards the Southern Irish state in the sense that they had done nothing about it. There was also a kind of resentment towards what had happened in 1966 in the commemoration of the 1916 Rising, and everybody was marching around Monaghan town and everywhere in Ireland commemorating this rising and saying that they were Republicans and saying that they were anti-British, etc. But then when the shit hit the fan in Belfast and Derry in particular, that the first thing was that they almost washed their hands of it. They didn't want to be involved in it. And I think for me there was very emotional moments watching the TV at that time, watching the Derry in 1969, watching Derry again on Bloody Sunday in 1972. And I think by the time I met Desi about 2 years after that, and when I met Dessie Grew, his views very much appealed to the way I was thinking in that time, and as yet had not had an opportunity to do anything about it. And Desi kind of was the kind of person who would always offer you an opportunity to do something about it. Sometime early in 1975, after the IRSP, ILA was established, Desi, through some discussions or whatever, we all joined the IRSP. We were both caught in relation to the same incident, and Desi spent time in Blancash and I spent time in Portlaoise. And I met Desi again in my 20s, and it was the same all over again meeting Desi, because he was that kind of person. When you met him again, he had the same enthusiasm, he had the same commitment, he had the same things. Like other of us would have, myself personally, would have lacked the same continuance of commitment that Desi had. But Desi always had it. He always had the enthusiasm, he always had the ability to convince, he always had he had the confidence. I think the confidence was a crucial thing, in the sense that we actually could win something here. But Desi could kind of appeal to our Republican or our socialist ideals and bring us back into the commitment again. And I think that was down to his persuasive capacity, and also into his own confidence and his own self-belief in the struggle. I was travelling about a bit, and Desi got out of prison again in 1988, and it was always when you met Desi, it was like old times again. You called at the house and you went down the street and you had the crack, and it was straight the same. It was as if we'd never left each other. We ended up in a situation where we spent a lot of time together. We were spending days, evenings, talking to each other. It was during that time when I think I got a real appreciation of what Desi was about. In the meantime, his brother Shamey had been killed. It had taken on a new intensity, and that intensity came out very strongly in the discussions that we had at that time. And those discussions, Desi had kind of stepped it up a level, in the sense that he was adamant and committed. Not that he wasn't before, but with a more focused approach to what was actually happening and what needed to be done. And in that sense, to see the bigger picture and to identify with anybody and everybody that was involved in a struggle against the British and what was happening in Ireland at that time. The way that Desi could analyse and approach something had a huge influence on me at that time, because I had been living in New York, and in New York everybody talked bullshit republicanism, And Desi was not talking bullshit republicanism 2,000 or 3,000 miles away. Desi was talking the reality of what was happening at this stage in the political life of Ireland. I remember him saying to me, we were driving to Dublin one time, this was in a previous period when we were I was about 20, 21, he was about 25 maybe. And he was saying we got into a conversation and he was saying what happened in the Free State cannot be let happen again. And he was saying what these people, like this one has political influence, this one has a big house, this one has this one has that in a business sense. He said the people, this is a fight for the people. And the people have to have rights in this fight. And it cannot end up that somebody else takes over, like happened in the Free State, that another group take over and just do the same thing that was happening before. Says this has to be a revolutionary change. It was no surprise to me that Dessie Grew took the struggle to Europe, took the Irish struggle internationally. Through conversations with him, Dessie Grew was well aware of the support that went on throughout Europe during the hunger strikes, during the 81 hunger strikes. He was well aware of the support that could be generated. He was well aware of the impact of making the Irish situation known outside of Ireland. His idea, I think, came from kind of revolutionary ideas that came from all over the world, from Cuba, South America. His idea was that you make your revolution felt, you make your revolution into a worldwide idea. At the time, I think he realised that there was a lot of things being compromised in Ireland through either informers or surveillance or whatever else was going on, particularly what had happened the East Tyrone, North Monaghan, Armagh area, in relation to the amount of people who had been killed in a short space of time. And I think Desi realised that you had to move with what was ever happening and to exploit whatever situation to your own advantage. And I think Europe was an option that Desi felt could be used to further his own beliefs in ridding the Brits out of Ireland, but also in his own beliefs of developing a socialist republic. This conflict was going to come to a conclusion at some stage, and that he seen his role as forcing it to that conclusion, but forcing it to a conclusion that actually changed things, instead of holding on to the status quo and holding on and embracing ideas of British imperialism that had occurred in Southern Ireland after they got independence. As he always looked at the bigger picture, he always looked at the bigger thing, he always looked to the future, he always looked to see what will happen afterwards. You cannot just carry on with some kind of struggle without some kind of idea of what you're going to do after the struggle. And I think from that point of view, he's seen Ireland within Europe and bringing that struggle against the British to Europe as perhaps focusing European tension on the problem in Ireland. The funerals had come home from Gibraltar, and Desi was very much aware that in some aspects of republicanism, where he had more recently joined again the provisional movement, that perhaps he would make a better funeral than a volunteer in the sense that maybe because he was such a deep thinker, so forward thinking and so opinionated and so expressive of his opinions, that he kind of felt to a certain extent that there were some elements within republicanism that may not have been as loyal to him as he was to republicanism. I was abroad, and I went into a train station. I was looking at a newspaper stand. I wasn't really going to buy them. I had hardly any money on me, and I seen the front page of an English newspaper. Dessie Grew had been shot dead, and I just couldn't take it in at all. You know, he had been so much a part of my life. He had been so much full of life himself. He had been so much everything in so many different ways. I walked out of that train station and I didn't know where to go. There was nobody to talk to. I was on my own. Very little money. Whatever little money I had, I spent ringing people that knew Desi, right from Armagh and Monaghan, and talking to them and asking them about it, and just talking to them till the money ran out, just for some kind of consolation in myself, to console myself. Just, I didn't know really what to do or where I would go or what, and the memories flooded back, all the memories of the years, all the memories of the past, the conversations, the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the different things that we had experienced, the different influences. And I mean, could not be at all underestimated the influence that Dessie Grew had on my life, the influence Dessie Grew had on my political beliefs, on my political direction. Dessie Grew was like a totally inspirational figure to me. His courage was within himself. His courage was within his own knowledge and confidence in that what he was doing was what he needed to be doing.
Was the club that both Desmond and Seamus would have played for underage and into senior football. Indeed, Seamus was part of the 1972 Junior Championship winning team. This is in our club. This is one of the teams that they were involved in. That would have been Seamus, and that would have been Desi.
Basically what happened was they had a car in here for a few days, and they had returned to with weapons, and the weapons were in the car, and they were here getting ready to go on the operation, and the SAS were hiding there in the pigeon loft down the road there a number of yards, and they shot the two of them dead. They went over and put a single bullet through the back of Desi's head. The last time I seen Desi was probably 2 weeks prior to getting killed. He came down. He would have visited me as often as possible. So then the next thing, I went to bed the night before the night he was killed. I was in bed. I didn't hear it on the news because I went to bed most nights 10 o'clock, half 10. You know. So I went to bed. I woke the next morning early, and the news reports were saying about two armed gunmen shot dead in Loughgall, County Armagh. So it described one of them as a leading local Republican. So at that stage I had a fair idea who it was. I got up, I got up in the morning and I made tea, breakfast or whatever, right? And I went walking around the yard to you know. A man called Joe Harper, and it was him who told me. The devastation.
You been closer to him, would you been spending all the time?
Right. As to the sacrifices that the family has been made, we at times feel sometimes cheated, as we would view the situation as being unresolved. We have conflict and we have difficulty in coming to terms with the final product. You know, we didn't sign up for what was later settled for. You know, the people sitting in Stormont, you know, administrating proprietors rule in Ireland. That, in our view, while we cannot speak for them, in our view, this is not what they did for.
Grew's sister's home at Blundell's Grange was ringed by scores of police officers in riot gear. A small crowd had assembled outside the house when the coffin was carried out. Draped in a tricolour, the coffin also bore Desmond Grew's beret and gloves. His father Pat and brother Aidan were pallbearers. Aidan Grew had been allowed out of the Maze prison for the funeral. A convoy of 10 RUC Land Rovers led the procession, with more behind. 3 army helicopters hovered constantly over the area as the procession moved towards St Columbkille's church. A piper played the lament as it was carried in. At the church, where more police were waiting in riot gear, several hundred mourners had gathered. Many had to stay outside during the service. Father Peter Kerr told the congregation Desmond Grew's death was tragic. The circumstances were unknown and questions were being asked. After 21 years of tragedy, he said, a solution seemed as far away as ever. The cortege set off for Armagh, police Land Rovers leading it as it headed towards St Patrick's Cemetery. The former Sinn Féin MP Bernadette McAlliskey was among several hundred people there to see Desmond Grew buried in the same grave as his brother Seamus, shot dead by the RUC 8 years ago. The mourners were almost outnumbered by the police officers in riot gear who ringed them. Desmond Grew's gravestone was inscribed, "May my blood serve as a seed for freedom." A wreath was laid from the IRA. After the burial, the police arrested a man who'd been among the mourners.
Turning in the sky, and you won't be the moon above us on the moonlit night, and you won't be the stars in heaven
Peter McCaughey. I was the youngest in a family of 5, born in Altadlushan in Galway. Martin was my older brother, and then I had an older sister, Sally, and was mum and dad. We were reared in Altadlushan, I say, which is a small rural enclave in Tyrone. We grew up a very happy family. We had all good times together when we were growing up. I always looked up to Martin because he was my older brother, my only brother. My sister was supposed a bit older than me, and I never really, she was away out running about before, but me and Martin would have been very close. Would have been at primary school together and at Ballygally School together for a year or so. And I suppose we grew close playing football and generally just walking around home with Daddy, and that we grew very close together. From an early age, me and Martin and the whole family was brought up in a very nationalist family. Daddy would have talked a lot about the history of Ireland and about my granda and that, who would have been in the RIB and would have helped out. Also steeped in a Republican tradition and history. Daddy would have emphasised, the 1916 rising, my granda, my great uncles who had a flee to America because of the troubles in Ireland. So it went on long before, I suppose, me and Martin was about. So I can remember sitting Daddy's knee, me and Martin basically sitting at his feet, and him telling us about granda and about the history and about himself. Indeed, he was involved in the IRA, I suppose, in the 50s and 60s, and in particular talking about an operation where District Inspector Ford was shot in Dungan along with a policeman years ago. I don't recall the exact dates, but a wee wry smile from Daddy would have told you he had some acting part in it, but we would have just went on ahead and sort of. But Daddy would have been very proud of that and would have taught us be fair, but to be be proud to be Irish and never forget where you're from and where you come from. And he was very proud of. He was not a Lushan man, a Tyrone man, but an Irish man.
Hundreds of years back, they've been associated with the Republican movement, both the IRB and all the other Fenian organisations that were at the time. And if it is one from that on, brought up till the present time, how the younger generation managed to still hold on to the old type of republicanism, which they have to the present day. So he went away to America, I suppose, to share his head and get things cooled off a bit. But then, sure, he wasn't long away till he had to come back home. So there he is. I don't know how long. He wouldn't have been more than, it would have been 3 months away, but so he come home anyway. But it never changed his attitude anyway. That more determined than ever. For he's a sort of a man, he was that kind of a man, once he took a thing into his head, he'd beat it be done. And there was a way of doing it if he could do it, but that's the mistake. A lot of them wasn't fit to be done. So I'm sure many a time he brooded over them things too. The man couldn't settle. He was every road. If there was anything to help one, or if he was any help to anything, he was there till be stand in. That was one thing. He was sitting in one place too long. I know. Oh, he did not. Because nobody knew where he was every day. Well, man, now here we come to, you all know what that is. Martin's burying gloves on the day of his funeral. This, I'm sure you know all them men. That's here. And then here you are. Very few has one that sizable. It's a proclamation. So, well, boys should all know here. 3 times out of the 6 men, there's one alive that did it. Where you are. Well, there's 2, I don't know which them 2 is there now, but there's another batch of them. 2 is it? Oh, I think that's about the most of these. Oh well, oh there's himself here, but there by an uncle, he's a brother of mine there, and that's me. He used to want me there, he was away. No, there's me there now, 25 years of age. The man standing behind me, Raina Hurtas, made me that. So, I'm not scarce of stuff. This is the local one here at the Haven for Martin McCaughey and Malcolm Legend.
Danny Morrison made the famous words, which are famous, I suppose, and everybody knows them, not everybody that's of an age to know them, was the arm light in one hand and the ballot box in the other. And Martin then was asked to stand in the Torrent ward as a Sinn Féin councillor, which at the start, I suppose he's a bit reluctant because he thought, I'm not really into politics in a way, but I suppose he's mature to realise that everything went hand in hand and that it had to be done, should have been the battlefield, should have been in Dungan Council, it had to be done. So he stood for council and rallied all the troops around him, putting up posters and all that, and was elected to the Torrent ward. I mind the very jubilant scenes after it, and I mind the photographs there of him and Daddy and him and Mummy standing in Capel with a tricolour, you know, and that was, there was a lad from Altadlushan, you know, an ordinary working lad, and he was here now, sitting in Dungan Council at that time. Unionists would have thought we own every council in Northern Ireland and we own every council here, and you know, things was changing where Unionists weren't getting it all. And the first night in the meeting, I remember him telling me, coming home with a bit of excitement, and he says that Ken McGuinness had tried to headbutt him and fired a chair at him, and the meeting was adjourned. And I remember Daddy saying to him, how did that happen? And he says that Ken McGuinness had shouted across the table at him that Martin was a murderer and had tried to kill him on 3 or more occasions, and had made a go for him and tumbled the chair and tried to headbutt him. But the whole thing was cancelled anyway, and then I suppose he went on ahead of his business in the council until the ambush in Kappa, when the SAS soldiers were executed by the IRA, when Martin was wounded in the gun battle, and that time there was a rule that if you didn't attend so many meetings in Dungan Council, you were suspended. So Martin, being shot half a dozen times, couldn't attend for obvious reasons.
I'd like to welcome you all here in Kappa tonight as we commemorate the deaths 2 years ago of our dear friends Eugene, Tony, Seamus, Declan, Jai, Jim, Paddy and Porrick. They too chose to become part of the armed struggle for freedom, and we are here to unveil a plaque which tells us that they, like so many before, since have paid the supreme price to attain that freedom. Our thoughts tonight are with their loved ones and with all those who are suffering because of the British occupation of our country. As you know well, 4 of the Loughgall martyrs came from this area. They enjoyed and depended on your support, and you in turn treated them in the manner befitting their status. I now ask, as your local Sinn Féin candidate, call on you for that same support. I trust that you will come out on the 17th of May and vote for me and my colleagues Shawnee Carr and Brenton Doris. We in turn will continue to highlight local issues, especially the abuse of our young people by British Crown forces. Thank you again for coming out this evening. May we remember the Loughgall martyrs with pride. May you look forward to freedom, justice and peace. Caughey Armagh.
Tonight we gather to remember our dead comrades, the Loughgall martyrs. Tonight you remember them by unveiling a plaque in the Armagh. We leave it to the politicians to use the force of argument. We will use the argument of force. Victory to the People's Army. Victory to the Provost. Caughey Armagh!
I remember early 1989, Martin was on the run in Dundalk. He had been recovering from the incident in Chiapa where he had been shot a number of times in the battle with the SAS. Me and Mum and Dad had been down visiting him, and we had left Dundalk 6-7 o'clock in the evening and said our goodbyes and tell him we'd call and see him the next week again. And I remember Daddy saying we'd call to Malachy's in Chiapa for a drink before we went home. So I was driving and went into Chiapa. We sat down just at the back of Malachy's. We weren't in 15 minutes till the door opened and Martin landed in with a few other friends and come down, and very surprised to see him because we left him in the dock an hour earlier, and he came down, he sat to me and Mum, and we had said to Martin, just need to be very careful because that time a lot of activity about it, and he says, listen, I'm staying in Chiapa, I'm staying home, I'm not leaving again. He says, this is basically where I belong, whatever happens, happens, and I'm staying here, I'm not going back. And we accepted that. And he lived openly and freely. He stayed up at home here, and there was no major problems. They had raided the house a couple of times that he wasn't there, but he was determined to stay at home. His heart was in the East Tyrone Brigade. The fight was there. The Chiapa ASU. That's where his heart belonged to. Always did, and that's where he wanted to be. And we weren't going to tell him any different. We were very proud of him.
My name's Sally McCaughey. I was born in Baltydlushan, and the eldest of 3. brother Martin and Peter. We were very close growing up on the family farm. We went to school in Cabra, and then I went on to Dungannon to the secondary school, and the boys went to St Kieran's in Ballagolly. There probably would have been a lot of political stuff going on at that stage, but we would have been not aware of it really because we were so young. I remember the house getting raided early on. I would have been left school at the time, but I'd say the two boys probably were still at school at that stage. I can remember them coming and getting us up early in the morning and making a stand. We're still in our night clothes and that. The stage then where Martin was getting lifted, and I was married at this stage, and I'd get the phone call or somebody would come to the house at that stage and say, your Martin has been lifted and you maybe need to go up and see your mum, and mum would be really upset about it now, you know, should be just because that time there was a lot of stuff going on when they were lifted, you know, about the treatment they were getting and things like that, and mum would have been very, very upset about that. Then Martin decided then to go to America. Mum was pretty pleased in one sense, but in another, from a mother's point of view, she was sad to see him go as well, that he would had to leave his own country and go away, and to her America would have been very far away, and I suppose she was wondering would he come back again, because she'd heard all these stories about years ago, people going away to America and never returning.
Take your time, said me father, stop rushing like hell, and remember all is not what it seems to be. For there's fellas would cut you for the coat on your back, or the watch that you got from your mother. So take care, me young bucko, and mind yourself well, and will you give this wee note to me brother? At the time, Uncle Benji...
America, we got obviously phone calls and letters, and he was enjoying life out in America. He was working, he had a good job, he was building, and as far as I can remember, he was doing bar work or that at night, and he was going great, moved into his apartment and everything. But just with the troubles, his calling was to come back home after all that was going on, tell his friends and family actually, and Martin would have been that kind. He was a very loyal person, and he wouldn't like to think that he would have gone away off and forgot about everybody. So that just was Martin. He come back home again. Mum was very pleased to see him home, but at the same time scared. Just had that feeling maybe when he's home now something will happen to him. I suppose she always had that fear at the back of her mind. But Mum was the kind of person who could worry, and at the same time she could have kept a very good front on things, you know.
Drew and pencil of Martin. It was done by the lads in Loughgall for the family. A photograph was actually in a memorial card. It was taken at a wedding just before he was, maybe the last wedding he was at, and it's one of the photographs where he said that, you know, take a good photograph of me now because it'll do the memorial card, in a jest and a joke, and it just unfortunately that's what happened. But I say the lads made it from a Loughgall, and this is a lily that Martin wore at Carrickmore in one of the colour parties, maybe the first colour party in the late 80s, whenever I suppose the colour party wasn't masked or wasn't in full uniform, but he was in the first colour party that year in Carrickmore, and that's the lily war we always kept it, so I just keep it there, just sort of to tie in the theme of Easter, the dead, the 1916 proclamation which Martin died for, and all, you know, everything that he believed in and he gave his life for. Martin would have been a very active IRA volunteer in the 80s, and I suppose as from what I can remember, I suppose I was maybe young then, but I still would have seen the daily routine of the army and the police and the harassment. And the 80s round here, and I suppose all over Ireland and all over the north, was I suppose the IRA had stepped up its campaign. They had a lot more weaponry and they seemed to have a lot more ingenuity and expertise, and there were kind of a lot more attacks. We living in Caughey here, we felt the full brunt of it, and I'm sure most people understand because they've been about. Caughey was, you know, described one time as sort of the forefront of the IRA. Ken McGuinness described it as a nest of IRA vipers, and different people described it, you know, as basically like we were alienated because of who we were. You know, beyond no illusion, we were living in a war zone here. This was a war. You know, it was there every day. People taking their children to school, people going to mass, people doing their daily work. It was every road. They moved in here, the checkpoints on the hills several times. People remember them coming in here and setting up. You know, people thought they're putting the watchtowers they had in South Armagh. There was massive personnel came in and materials, and they stayed for weeks on end. And from us even leaving here and going to Caughey till Boyle's shop, to Ruby's shop, to get in, you were stopped 3-4 times, but that was part of life. We accepted it. I can recall one incident where Martin and another local Republican was stopped not far from our home place in Reclain Road near McCann Engineering. They were stopped by the paratroopers one middle of the day during the week, and the paratroopers obviously realised who they'd got and decided that they would try to install a bit of fear or a bit of their normal tactics of the people of this area. Martin was a passenger, and the paratrooper proceeded to put the safety catch off his weapon and click it back and forward and clicking back and forward. He put the gun into the thing and he put it to Martin's head and our father's head, and he told him what he'd like to do with him, blah blah blah, that sort of stuff, the usual stuff you were getting. He then took the gun out, and I suppose much to the amusement, which I suppose is a terrible thing, but much to the amusement of Martin and the other fella, he put the gun in his toe to keep, I suppose, the muzzle off the ground from getting dirty, and I think he mustn't have realised that the safety catch was off, and he managed to blow the foot of himself. And they still were held there, and he was running about shouting and roaring, and the helicopter had to come and take him away. So needless to say, Martin came up the road that time and he was claiming that as well, you know. But sort of, it was, you know, that's the kind of instance happened where even again Martin and another fellow were stopped by a policeman, and I think it was the same area, and that policeman, he lost the head. He seemed to just take into a real head stagger. He threatened to shoot Martin and shoot the other fella and lost the head and really lost the plot, couldn't stick it, and he finished up. That UDR was there, and for a change they had to hold him down and took the gun off him until the helicopter come and took him away, because they were in fear of what he was going to do. Now, I don't think they were in fear of what he was going to do to Martin and them, but I think they were in fear of if they had opened up what was going to happen to them. But that was two instances, you know. We had other instances where they started to attack your family, and I remember an instance where me and my father was going to a funeral, and Daddy was an old man, that's 70 plus. They took his shoes off in the rain and coat off and harassed him big time. But Daddy took it, stood there, and guess it was part of life, you know. People coming in from a different country, a different area, and this is the way they treated us in our own community. But it was all psychological, but at the end of the day, we took it in our stride. We were hard strengthened. The Irish people was hardened to this kind of behaviour. And in fact, it was them that psychologically was wrecked. You know, I can remember my father telling me, and I remember it vaguely, an incident over in Caughey on Maisie's Hills, we called it, Corrigan's Hill, where a policeman who was a member of the Dungannon, the MSU, actually cut his wrists and writ individuals' names on a sign, on a sign of what he wanted to do to them, and he writ it in his own blood. He was a cop called, I think it was Curly they called him. I think I remember those names from the past. But this was the kind of people that was here. They were psychologically, but yet they were supposed to be the forces of law and order as they seen them. We seen them as nothing more than bigots and people who wanted to come in here and bow us down and terrorise us. But it certainly didn't work for my family, and it certainly didn't work for the people of Chiapa and Yalbally. Another instance where I remember personally, Martin was actually dead at the time. He was only dead maybe 6 weeks or a month, 2 months, whatever it was, and me and Daddy and my mum was heading to, that time there was early mass in Yalbally. We went to early mass, and just on McCrory's Hill in Dernyach, the UDR was stopping, and they pulled us in as normal and stopped us. But from the start they were very, very aggressive. Now, they always were aggressive, but they were really aggressive more than normal. And 2 of the UDR men actually came down to the car and started to give my mother bad manners, my father bad manners, but Mum, being dignified, just looked forward and didn't acknowledge them. But one of the UDR men actually took the safety catch off the gun, and he put it in through the car window, and he put it to my head, and he actually pulled the trigger. Now, obviously there was nothing in the weapon, as I'm here to tell the story tonight, but he then walked over and he done the same to Mum, and at that stage Mum took a heart attack. And out on the road, now at that stage the police landed. Someone had called the police, as in some of the UDR personnel, because they said that we were giving them hassle. Now there was me, a 70-year-old and a 60-year-old, so they were going to arrest us, they were going to arrest me for obstruction. But Mum was there, and the police landed, and Mum was lying on the road, and one of them come down and actually put a blanket, or a silver blanket over. It was like a thermal blanket, you know. And somewhere looked at people, called an ambulance, and one of the UDR men actually walked over and said, "Let the old cow lie there. If she dies, don't worry about her," and walked on. I remember that vaguely. And they arrested me that morning for, they said, knocking down a driven and hit a UDR soldier on the leg, and at the checkpoint it was nonsense, like there was nothing. But the rest of me, it was to cover up the crimes against my mother and my father. But Mum spent a week in hospital that time. She nearly died. But the next night in Tallies may have been, if memory serves me right, the 17th of March. It might have been the 16th of March. There were a few people drinking in Tallies, and the same UDR were stopping outside it, and a full-scale riot ensued where local people were attacked and the UDR were attacked, and they had to actually run and flee the area. No, this was a sense of people had taken enough, and people were just fighting back, you know, and people felt it, and this was, you could talk all day about the stories of harassment, the raids, stopping in the lane, the harassment, but there's just a few that comes to mind that I can remember in our family. But a lot of people in this area, a lot of families suffered the same grief and the same torture and the same psychological and physical torture that we went through for a long time. I suppose in theory the British government and the military people sitting in Lisbon and these places had a theory that if they harassed Republicans' family enough, that it would beat the IRA, quell the IRA and defeat the IRA. But they obviously had their strategy wrong, because it made more young people and made more people resolute to probably join the IRA and help the IRA. And I suppose the amount of operations carried in this area alone, and the amount of operations carried out across the board, is precedent to what happened, you know. And sort of the biggest incident we had here, amongst a lot of them, was on the 24th of March 1990. It was a Saturday. It was the day before Mother's Day, because I remember it very well. I remember getting stuff from Mum that Saturday, so I remember it was, and it took place in Chiapa village. And I say I sort of still have the paper sort of this was kept from that time, and it gives a sort of a, you know, the headline is IRA ambush sting the Brit assassins. It happened in Chiapa. It was Saturday morning, and the IRA were planning, you know, from listening to people and listening to the papers and listening to those talking to Martin and generally talking to people. The IRA had an operation planned, but it seems that the SAS had planned another attack like Loughgall, where they're going to try and wipe out which was their state of play. They were killing volunteers in Tyrone. They weren't arresting them, as happened in Carlisle and happened in Staban, happened in Drumnacilly. And this was their plan. And IRA looked at people all day on that Saturday, had noticed a strange amount of people. And in this area at that time, a strange car, a strange van, a strange person walking was noticeable. People knew who everybody was. They knew the fields, they knew if a gate was open, they knew everything. And obviously at some stage during the day, somebody said to the local IRA, listen here, the strange people driving about, just be careful. So the IRA set up a monitoring situation where what's the situation, what's going on, and they spotted out a number of vehicles with strange personnel on board which weren't adapt to the area, which weren't part of the area, and they decided to turn the screws and instead of sit and be ambushed, they decided to ambush the military personnel. It seems the IRA used the car. It was an XR3A. It was a car that the Brits was watching, and they said, well, so we'll turn the clock here and we'll use it as an ambush tool. So they moved the car about various places through the Gelbley, Donoughmore. They drove it about, and they recognised who was actually what cars was to stop civilians being hurt in that. And then in Kappa Village they put the plan into operation. The XR3A was sitting somewhere between Malachy Boyles and Kappa, the monument in Kappa. There's a wee road up to your left, we call it up the wee Mansley, and a red, as far as reports come, a red Passat or a red car of some kind came through the village, come in that road by Malachy Boyles Bar, and Martin and his comrade were sitting at the bottom of the wee Mansley and sitting adjacent to Kappa. When the car went by, the XR3 pulled up alongside it, and pulled up behind it, and Martin emerged from the sunroof and started fire on the driver, and according to eyewitness reports, the driver was hit. Now, obviously he kept control of the car, and the gun battle raged through Kappa Village, because local people was out there here. The gun battle, it raged until it got to a place over called Scrog Corner, which is just the edge of Kappa Village. Now, halfway down that road, another soldier appeared out of the boot of the car. So obviously the driver pulled the boot and he started to open fire, and he hit the car. It started to riddle the car. Martin was hit 4 times at that stage in the right head, in the shoulder, in the stomach and the leg. He was hit, and another volunteer who was driving the car was hit twice, not severely. So Martin, knowing that the situation, I suppose, the other soldier was obviously dead as well, he was lying on the road, knowing the situation was that there was no other, they had to leave the area, withdraw, so Martin gave the order to withdraw, and one of the volunteers headed out and commandeered the car. The other volunteers driving the car went up to Capper village, but because of the gunfire coming from other hidden soldiers in the hedge, Martin stayed back to cover the withdrawal, and once he realised the other volunteer had escaped, Martin then made his escape. He made up Capper State. He was wounded 4 times, he was bleeding heavily, but he held on to the weapon. He kept it, he didn't let go, because I suppose he realised that somewhere along the line he could run somebody else, so he kept the weapon, and another volunteer reversed through the gunfire down the street and got him to safety. As soon as this was happening, local people were obviously out watching what was going on. At this stage, local police, or police that was involved in Chiapa, namely Alan Jared Douglas, who was the Chiapa sergeant at the time, who was harassing people, they landed in bulletproof Sierras. They had been sitting at various vantage points, and they came in and told local people who were stopped, there's 2 pros lying dead. You know, we got them. But when they got there, the tables was turned, and they just blacked the whole thing out. They sealed the area off, and there wasn't a word about it till I think Monday, where the words they used in the papers and the words they used in the Republican news who quoted the paper was that an ambush had taken place on an unmarked vehicle, but there was no injuries, which everybody knows to be true. And several weeks later, word came through that 2 soldiers had been killed in Germany in a car crash, which was a common thing as well. In the Christ of Van in Germany, there was also 2 soldiers killed in Plum Bridge in a car crash. So people were 2 and 2 together. They weren't going to give the IRA a victory. They weren't going to give the IRA any credit for what happened that day, for turning the screws, because of morale and that. So they tasted, but everybody knows, people at Chiapa knows, if you ask anybody what happened that day, everybody knows that the IRA turned the screws on the SAS. And that, you know, and I can remember sitting in the house, and I remember getting a phone call, and there was a policeman rang me. I didn't realise the time that he rang me, and he says, you tell that brother of yours that the SAS don't forget, and that they'll settle all scores. And it just come back to me the day Martin was killed that he had said that. You know, I remember him saying that, and I suppose Martin realised that, like, you know, when you take on, especially the SAS or undercover soldiers, your life's in jeopardy. But he come home, resumed active service, and it just shows the calibre of Martin and his dedication to the struggle.
I heard the news early that morning, and it said about a Tyrone man suspected. It didn't say any names or anything, but I just had this feeling in the pit of my stomach something was wrong. And I had to go away that morning. I suppose I didn't get a chance to ring Mum and Dad. I didn't ring them because I didn't want to annoy them, making something out of nothing. So I waited, and I went to the school with my son, and we were in the wee play group, and I seen a neighbour woman coming to the door, and the teacher had said to me, there's someone out here who wants to speak to you. And as soon as I seen that person, I just knew that something was wrong. But they wouldn't actually tell me. They just said I was needed at home because Dad wasn't well. I suppose I didn't want him making a scene at the school in case something, you know, because it was a mixed school he went to because of with his special needs. And I just refused. I said, no, you just have to tell me what's wrong before I move from here. And so then they just said, no, you need to come home. So I did come home, but at that stage it hadn't still been confirmed, but it was sort of known that it was him that was shot. And that just, everything just, your life just changes. I think it's just something, you know, at the back of your mind all down through the years, it's something you wait on that call. That something can go wrong, but at the same time when it comes, it's very unexpected as well, because you're out hoping that it'll never come, but unfortunately it does. And it was just, I remember going up home to Mum and Dad, and the house was just in chaos. It was absolutely devastating to see Mum and Dad. Dad would have been more trying to find out what exactly was going on, Mum would have been just devastated, really. But surprising at the same time how strong she was through it all. She got the strength to go on through it all as well, and you know, she was amazing, because that was the one thing I always worried about Mum, because Mum is very, very soft-hearted, and I always thought if anything happens to one of our ones or any of us, she'll just go to pieces. It'll just be the end of her. But she surprised us with her strength. But in saying that, behind it all, it does take its toll.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers are falling. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. But come you back when summer's in the meadow, or when the
Waking at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had a very bad feeling in my stomach. Waking at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I remember Daddy had the news on. It was like the downtown news or world news, and the news come on that 2, as they referred to, Republican or terrorists had been shot dead at Loughgall, and instinctively at that stage knew it was Martin and Desi. And I couldn't do nothing till now, Mummy and Daddy, at that stage, but I knew. And at 6 o'clock, I didn't sleep anymore. 6 o'clock I got up and I got into the car, and Dad said where was I going. I said I had a few things to do, so I left. And I remember going to Brian Arthur's, and Brian was there, and I met Brian at the door. He knew what I knew and I knew what he knew, basically. So we gave it, he made me a cup of tea and coffee, him and Paula, and I remember saying I need to be sort of strong here. And I remember going over to Father McCaughey and got him up very early. I think he was still in bed, and me and Brian went in. And once we met at the door, Father McCaughey shook his head and says, "Oh no, not another holiday." He says, "I can't take much more of this." So I says to him, would he go up with us and see Mummy? Basically, Mum was the one I was worried about, because obviously her son had been killed. And I got him arranged to go up and see Mum, and I mind getting Dr. Caughey. At the time, I got him privately, and Dr. Caughey says, "Oh, no problem," he would come straight out. So he came out, and I remember meeting them at the bottom of the lane and having to go up and tell my Mum and Dad. And that's his Daddy basically knew something was wrong, but Mum had no idea. And I had to go in and just say, "Mum, Martin was killed last night." And I can remember the tears and the crying and the wailing. And I'm sure it was the same in many's household, and especially Cappagelly, but all over Ireland it happened. And I remember them feeling. I remember the day of day, but I'm sure Mum and Dad remember it as long as I can remember it. And Mum, basically Dr. Caughey tried to calm her down, And then that everything kicked in. The people come round, as people do in this area in times of trouble, and tried to help out. The phone then rang, and I answered the phone, and it was a police detective from Golf Barracks. I can remember it vividly. Daddy was standing beside me, and I remember the words he said to me. He says, we're sitting here having a party. He says, "Listen to this," and there was cheering and roaring in the background. They were shouting and singing and laughing. There's music going, and he said to me, "Listen," he says, "Peter, don't bother bringing Martin home," he says, "because," he says, "the price of lead," he says, "the minute in our scrapyard is very, very high, and Martin's full of lead," he says, "so just take him in and drop him off," he says, "don't bother taking him home," he says. So I can remember the words I said back to him was, "Well, I suppose it's a long road, there's no turning," I says, and I just dropped the phone. And that hardened, it hardened my resolve even more, that this was wrong, what was happening, and that we had to stand up and keep fighting and keep going on.
At Galbally in County Tyrone this afternoon, the security forces present seemed even heavier for the funeral of the former Dungannon Sinn Féin councillor Martin McCaughey, whom the IRA have now said had been injured in the IRA attack at Kappa in March. His coffin too was draped in a tricolour as it was brought out from his home at Altnaglushan. It too bore his beret and gloves. The cortege made its 4-mile journey from the house to St John's Church. About 200 mourners followed. Several hundred more waited outside the church as the rain grew heavier. Convoys of Land Rovers arrived before the coffin, which was led by a piper. Many people who'd attended Desmond Grew's funeral were also at Martin McCaughey's. The oration by the graveside at St John's Church was given by Martin McGuinness.
I remember a priest landing us and taking me and Daddy out to the street. And Martin had specific wishes left. He wanted a military funeral. He wanted the bury in gloves. He wanted the flag of his country, which he died for, and rightly so. And I can remember the priest taking me and Daddy into the garden and saying, Owen and Peter, tomorrow, he says there'll be no paramilitary displays or paramilitary flags or emblems in the chapel, in accordance with I think at that stage it was Cardinal Daly. And I remember Daddy saying to him, listen, Father, I'm a religious man, and no disrespect to you, but he says the flag and the burying gloves will be going to the chapel, and if you don't want to bury him, he says, I'll get some priest that will bury him. And we left it at that. There was no question about what was going to happen. It was going in. That was his wishes, and we weren't going to deny Martin's last wishes. The morning of the funeral, actually, I'm glad it was actually videoed to people see. There was hundreds and hundreds of Land Rovers and hundreds of military and police harassing people going to the funeral. So that morning, and I can't remember who was there, but somebody was negotiating with the police to go back. But I remember Daddy saying to me, we couldn't even get off the street. The police had hemmed the whole thing in. And I remember Daddy saying, like Lawrence Marley's funeral, basically, if I have to bury him in the front garden, we'll bury him in the front garden. We're not. People should be allowed to bury their dead in peace. That was part of wars for history and history. And everybody was allowed to bury their dead in peace, except Republicans. That was the basic logic on it. And we weren't going to be any different from Martin. We're going to bury him with peace and dignity and respect that he deserved. So the police eventually moved back a bit, but down the lane harassing people. And I remember we walked to the chapel. Daddy loved walking, Martin loved walking, so we all walked to the chapel, and everybody walked in the rain to the chapel. And I can remember the police at Johnny McKinnon's engineering works trying to drive in front of the hearse and nearly tumbling people and that, and had to stop again. It was a long journey there, and I can remember it vividly. And I remember getting to the chapel, and I remember, one of the priests, there were several priests at the door, Daddy was on one side carrying the coffin, I was the other. I was on the left and he was on the right. And I remember coming across, and I remember the piper was playing. And I remember it was very sombre, because the piper was sort of the last thing you got before you went to the grave, before you went to the mass. And the priest, I remember stopping and saying to Daddy, remember Owen, what I told you yesterday? And the burying gloves and that was still on the coffin. And I remember Daddy saying, move aside, Father. He wasn't hateful, he said, just move aside. And the priest did move aside, and we went in. And we didn't know nobody. We buried Martin with the dignity and respect that he deserved.
Across the morning sky, all the birds are leaving.
This is the Republican plot in Galway. That's where Martin's buried. It's nice that they're all together, all young lads. You can see from the ages 19, Martin was the oldest, 24. And just across from it here, maybe a couple of years before Daddy died, Daddy came in here and picked that spot there. And he says he would like to be beside Martin. So it's very ironic that, I suppose, in death, in the graveyard, they're very close to each other, and in life they were very close to each other. As father and son, as comrades, as friends, they were very, very close. So it's nice we can come here as a family, and it's comforting to know that Daddy and Martin are beside each other.
Who knows where the time goes? Who knows where the time...
My family over the years, as have a lot of other families, have given a lot for a United Ireland. I hope to see it in my lifetime. I hope it's achieved and achievable, and if not, well, hopefully my children will benefit from it and live to see it.
I do not count the time. Who knows where the time goes? Who knows where the time
I've been loving you a long time, down all the years, down all the days, and I've cried for all your troubles. Smile at your funny little ways. We watched our friends grow up together, and we saw them as they fell. Some of them fell into heaven, some of them fell into hell. I took shelter from a shower, and I stepped into your arms on a rainy night in Soho. The wind was whistling all its charms. I sang you all my sorrows. All your joys. Whatever happened to that old song? To all those little girls and boys. I'd wake up in the morning, the ginger lady by my bed, covered in a cloak of silence. I'd hear you talking in my head. I'm not singing for the future, I'm not dreaming of the past, I'm not talking of the first times, I never think about the last. Now the song is nearly over, we may never find out what it means. Still there's a light